And welcome back to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. This is my match reaction, my 5 takeaways from Fulham's 2-2 draw against Arsenal on Saturday at the Emirates. I want to also mention, please do check out our match reaction show that was recorded yesterday, Saturday, with Dan Crawford from HammyN.com and the Green Pole podcast. That was great. That was recorded about 3 hours after the match ended, so you're going to get some really good stuff from Dan Crawford and myself. Please check that out. This episode is really a compliment to that. So let's get to it. Let's go through my 5 takeaways from this draw. Let's start with number 5. And number 5 actually involves before, during, and after the match. Number 5, the media coverage of this match was all about Arsenal. Before the match, listening to commentary, social media, broadcast media, it was all about Arsenal. Very little to do with Fulham. All the buildup, it seemed to all be about Arsenal. Now, I get a lot of coverage here in the States, and I'm just telling you, very little mention of Fulham. It was all from an Arsenal perspective. When I watch a match, when I watch a game, that's what I would call a national or international broadcast. I want both sides. Don't favor one side over the other. I want both sides. And I'm telling you, overall, this was a completely one-sided coverage of this match by the media. Before the match, it was evident. During the match, when you really want to see both sides, Sometimes you see it when you're watching a match. Sometimes you don't. I would say this one favored a lot more to do with Arsenal. What I found interesting was, in one instance, I'm going to give you is the way that they described Fulham's first goal. They basically treated it like it was an accident. That was not an accident. That was absolutely not an accident. He actually intended to do that. We're talking about Andreas Pereira, but it was viewed in this broadcast I was watching like this was not done on purpose. It was an accident. So for me, that just showed a little bias there. After the 2-2 draw, you could really see it on so many different programs I watched. It was on NBC Sports. I seen the coverage in England of this match. It's all about Arsenal, what Arsenal did wrong, instead of what you would hope they would say, what Fulham did right to get this 2-2 draw, because they were up against it. They were leading for a good portion of this match, and you could just feel, you knew at some point Arsenal would come back, and then they did, to their credit. But this match, in my opinion, has been looked at by the media as more to do with what Arsenal did wrong than what Fulham did right to earn a point. And you should be offering both, not favoring one or the other. This is, to me, one of the reasons why people talk about this Big Six bias, and it showed itself for me with the coverage. I've seen a lot of coverage on this. I'm telling you, it's 95% Arsenal to 5% Fulham, which is just wrong. So that's why that's my number 5 takeaway. Number 4 maybe goes a little bit with this, and that's this. The calls should go both ways. The officials, VAR, ref, the linesman, it should be a non-biased situation. It should just be looking at each and every call, making the calls, but making sure it's a even playing field. That's the way that I've always looked at it. So when I'm looking back at this match and I look at it, and I know Marco Silva is very upset about the Calvin Bassey situation, and he has a right to be, because there was an Arsenal player that he mentioned that potentially was time wasting longer than Calvin Bassey. Calvin Bassey is the one that got the yellow card. When you look at the yellow cards, forgetting about the managers, Fulham got all the yellow cards. Is that right? Here in America, when I watch, say, an NHL hockey game, they try to even out the calls. They really do with penalties. They try to make it even on each side. And I'm not saying that you need to do that, but it shouldn't be one-sided. Are you telling me Arsenal did nothing during this match for any player to get a yellow card? I find that hard to believe. So for me, I think it's important to point out these situations. Listen, if there's a call out there that Fulham got that I don't feel that they deserve, I'm going to mention it. I'm going to say, you know what? Arsenal, they should have gotten that call. And then I hope on the other way, someone would say, you know what? Fulham should have gotten this other call. It should try to be as even as possible when you're talking about calls. And in this case, I'm sorry. It certainly was not, in my opinion. The calls should go both ways. It shouldn't be one-sided. That's why that's my number 4. Number 3, Raul Jimenez did his job in this match for Fulham. And what's interesting, Dan Crawford talked about this, about some of the stick he's getting online in social media from some of the Fulham supporters. And I think where it comes from is that Alexander Mitrovic, he's never going to be Alexander Mitrovic. He's a different type of striker. And oh, by the way, I don't think he was brought in to be the replacement for Alexander Mitrovic. But Mitro's not here. So in steps Raul Jimenez, 3 matches, and I'm already seeing people making judgments on this player. And if you're going to do that, make a judgment, you got to give the player some more time. It's too small of a sample to make a judgment on Raul Jimenez. The one thing that I will tell you is that he worked his socks off in this match, and I thought he played very well. So he approaches it differently than Mitro. I think he gave Arsenal fits in this match. Fulham weren't going to have the ball that much, but he was making himself known. He worked very hard in this match, deserves credit for it. All I'm saying is give this guy a chance, because it's not always about the first impression. If we did that, Chris Baird would have never turned out to be the player that he turned out to be. Thankfully, he got more of a chance with Fulham. There are so many Tim Ream. People buried Tim Ream. Look how that turned out. So many players. It doesn't just start from the get-go. They need some time. And I think Raul Jimenez might be one of those players. There's nothing wrong with that. Give Raul Jimenez a chance to succeed. I think he's going to succeed at Fulham big time. I think Fulham are going to bring in another striker. He's going to be a piece of the puzzle, and I think a very valuable piece. So please give Raul Jimenez a chance, and I think he will reward you for that chance. Okay, let's go to number 2. And number 2 is a big one, because I've said this on Cottage Talk several times. And many will judge the first couple of games. They'll judge the preseason, and they'll say, Fulham are in trouble. And I kept saying this. Wait for Paulinho. So this is why it's my number 2 takeaway. Fulham are a completely different team with Paulinho. It's fact, not opinion. Let your eyes be the judge of that. Fulham are a different side. He basically makes Fulham tick. Doesn't just protect the back 4. He obviously can score goals too. Off of a set piece, wonderful. But it's everything that he does. He's a tackling machine, but he allows Fulham to be who Marco Silva wants them to be. They need that piece. That's why he's so valuable to Fulham Football Club. So even though match of the day was talking about him, basically other teams could be sniffing around. They could be sniffing around all they want. Fulham should not sell him for any price right now. He's too valuable. 100 million, 150 million. It just doesn't matter. He should be a player for this season, and then we'll worry about next season in the summer coming up. Not this summer, next summer. Jean Paulinho is so valuable to Fulham Football Club. The money will not come anywhere close to what he brings you. They do not function the same way. They've not figured it out. They won at Everton, but it was not the same team. They didn't flow the same way. They didn't play the same way. He affects so many things. He, I think, had a positive effect on Sasa Lukic. Allow Sasa Lukic to be more of the player that he's intended to be. He's not intended to do the role of João Paulinho, but he's been asked to, just in a little bit different way. João Paulinho changes Fulham, and that's why my number 2 is Fulham are a completely different team with Paulinho. That's one of the reasons why I'm still seeing 7 for Fulham Football Club. Not changing my mind on that. Okay, coming up next is my number one takeaway from this match for Fulham against Arsenal. Okay, my number one takeaway for this match for Fulham against Arsenal starts with this. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. Why this is my number one, because it's a little bit about my history. My father was an accountant. Growing up, I was surrounded by numbers. It was all about numbers, all about stats. Grew up a huge Boston Red Sox fan. So many stats in baseball. But what's interesting about it, and I knew all the stats growing up, and I loved it. But as I got older, I realized there's a lot more to the game of baseball than just statistics. They don't tell you the entire picture. They tell you a piece of the picture, or they can back up what you watched. Sometimes, not all the times. So that's going to lead to my number one. And I tweeted this out, and I'm going to read my tweet right now. Number one takeaway from this match: F the XG crap. Stats are great, but they can't measure heart, determination, and playing for each other. Fulham defy the stats, and you can shove XG up your blankety blank. That's my number one. And I think it's a valid number one because I continually see this. Fulham are defying XG. They didn't deserve 10th last season because the XG stats say otherwise. And I'll say it once again, F that crap. They deserve 10th. I also heard, well, if it wasn't for Bernd Leno, then Fulham wouldn't have been 10th. That's the reason why XG doesn't work for them. And I say, so I should be upset that Bernd Leno is such a great goalkeeper? Well, he can't keep that up, Russ. Why can't he? He's an elite goalkeeper. He can't keep it up. This is who he is. He will continue to play like this. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to become a bad goalkeeper. He is a difference maker for Fulham Football Club, being a shot stopper. So Fulham are probably going to defy XG for years to come as long as Bernd Leno's there. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should actually be celebrating that instead of thinking, uh-oh, they're in trouble because this is what XG is telling me. XG is fine. If you want to be into your stats, that's great. They don't tell you everything. They certainly don't tell you what's in the mind, heart, and determination of a player. They just don't do that. The stat doesn't measure how a team plays together. It just doesn't. It absolutely does not. Expected goals and expected goals against don't tell you that. They don't talk about what's in a player. They just don't. And that could be a difference. That could be a huge difference. They don't tell you how good of a manager is. XG doesn't give you that. So you can look at XG. You could tell me, uh-oh, Fulham are in trouble. And I'll tell you they're not, because XG does not tell you the story of Fulham Football Club. And I love that Fulham defy this statistic. I love it. Bring it. Keep bringing this XG crap to me, because I'm going to keep on deflecting it and telling you Fulham are going to prove XG wrong the entire season. And that's why that's my number one takeaway. As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. My name is Russ Goldman. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.